All right. Hey, everyone. Thanks for tuning in. And we have already got Perry Epps' press. Katie, who's just saying, hail, can't stick around, but I'll be sure to catch up later. Have a great stream. Thank you, Katie. It's always great to see you, and best wishes to you and your little family there. So, all right, everyone. Thanks for tuning in. First off, another awesome thank you to my supporters on Patreon. We've got Warrior Bernard, Fighters, Maxwell, Foster, and Q, and of course, Defender LG. Thank you so much for your support, guys. It really means a lot. And I'm super excited to bring on a special guest for tonight's stream, Brett Humphrey. Now, Brett and I met back in June of this year when we were at Phoenix Fan Fusion. And I think I met Brett from him zooming past my booth multiple times, like Sonic the Hedgehog, before the doors opened, and he was like, dude, I got to get my steps in. And, and also he wanted to see all the cool stuff. And that's the best time to be in the exhibitor hall is before the doors are open and you can check out all the cool stuff. And come to find out, Brett is an awesome author with 7 books under his belt. Mm-hmm. And what I really loved was that his books are family friendly, more kid, teen oriented, and they've got some great messages. So I was super blessed when Brett said, yeah, dude, I'll totally come on and let's do an interview. So Brett, thanks for coming on, man.
Hey, thanks for having me. I'm excited about this. Yeah, our booths were back to back. We rarely got to see each other, but right? That was pretty cool. We were pretty busy. It was awesome.
Yeah. Richie, thanks for tuning in, man. Absolutely. I'm ready to get into Brett's story. So Brett, if you don't mind, would you start us off with telling us about, your life? Where'd you grow up? How did you get started? And how did you get all the way into writing?
Yeah, cool. So I grew up in Southern California, born in the city of Orange, lived there through about 6th grade, lived in the same little area, went to the same school with all my friends. And then we moved to Central Coast of California and then there for about 3 years and then moved back down to Southern California, went to San Clemente High School and Santa Barbara. So very much a California beach guy. And then I've been in the desert now. So I was in the Palm Springs area for 21 years. And now I've been out here in the Phoenix area for 12. So the beach is in my soul, but I just have to longingly look at it way, way away.
Right.
So growing up, I always loved to read. I remember my dad, my mom too, but my reading to us as kids. And my dad would do voices for the different characters. And so I just loved reading at an early age. My parents just let me read. I loved fantasy. I loved the genre. I loved what could be done with that. And then really that was as a kid, we used to do these readathons and there was one other girl. I remember one other girl in my class and some kids would be like, man, we made 100 pages and we'd be in the thousands. Cause it would just devour books, all kinds of different books. But then actually really in my junior high years, my parents split up. And so books became a lifeblood for me. And then I would go to the library and I started devouring all kinds of stuff. I read books that were way past my reading level and just they looked interesting. I think at that point, I don't know, maybe 7th, 8th grade, I read Dante's Inferno because it sounded interesting. And so I'm reading through.
It is quite interesting.
I don't know what I'm reading. Yeah. So, I just really read and I loved reading and I loved writing even from a kid. And so I always wanted to write. And then I made the mistake of taking a creative writing course in college. And that creative writing course stopped my writing for years because the professor, while he was very good in his mind, if you're not a Hemingway, if you're not somebody like that, that's not creative writing. He didn't like what I wrote. I'd write fantasy or kids stuff, and he would always tear it apart. And so I thought, well, maybe I'm not a writer. I gave up. And so, I in my job, and I was a kids pastor for years, so I'd write stuff for kids, and I'd write plays, and I would write vacation Bible school stuff, but really cool stuff, not just like boring. It would be exciting things. And it wasn't until I was, 2019, I sat down to start writing again. So I was 54. And I said, well, maybe I can write. and I knocked out my first book in about a 3-month period. I'd taken a sabbatical, and I realized that my creativity that I was using when I was a kids pastor and teaching and writing and being fun, I wasn't using anymore. And it was just inside me, just sort of wanting to get out. And I came back from the sabbatical and I said, well, I've got plenty of nonfiction how-to books that I could write on teaching kids. And I was an educator for years. And I thought, let's try fantasy. And that's how the first book was written. So I published first book. It was in December of 2019, and then 2020. It was a year, as everyone felt, a year of hell. I managed to write 3 books that year.
Nice.
While going through, my job was stressful. Going through COVID, my wife was diagnosed with breast cancer, and I still don't know how I did it. And then I've just kept writing ever since. So 1 or 2 books a year. And then I haven't published in a year, and I'm feeling like, man, I'm really behind. And people are like, wait a minute, you've done 7 books in 4 years. Like, I guess perspective. I guess that's I guess so. So that's kind of how I got into writing, and I found it is that need to just get the story out. And
Right.
I still devour books. I probably read, I don't know, 2-3 books a week. Still
Holy
while I'm
cow.
writing. I know I'm a voracious reader, and I read lots of stuff, all kinds of genres, just to see what's out there and help me hone my craft too. So it's a long answer to your question, but I hope I answered the question.
I mean, I think you hit all the high points there. And what's crazy is how you and I basically bounced almost in the exact same areas throughout our life. Now, you got a few years on me, like 1 or 2, but I was in Desert Hot Springs. You were in Palm Springs. You know,
Yep.
so we were...
Actually, Desert Hot Springs is where I lived. I just tell people Palm Springs because they don't know. Yeah,
because it's the nicer
hood
part of the valley.
It is. People would call us up whenever there was a police action in Desert Hot Springs. They'd call up and say, "Are you guys safe?" And we're like, "Yes, we are." It's the whole town isn't terrible, but well, a lot of it is.
So that was where my dad used to try to. I think he took me out for breakfast or lunch like once a week. I think that was his thing, or once every other week. And so that's where we would go to that McDonald's that I think was right by there was a grocery store.
Vaughn's right there.
And then
Del Taco was next door. Yeah.
Yep. And then across the street was where the Blockbuster was. And then, of course.
Yep. Blockbuster, Kmart. Yeah. Yep. I know exactly what it is, brother.
Yeah. So Desert Hot Springs was awesome.
Yeah. My kids tell stories about growing up, things we didn't know when they were kids. I'm like, ooh, maybe we should have moved before that. But okay, I'm glad you guys are alive. Yep. So that's good.
Yeah. Desert Hot Springs was quite an interesting place. And then, you know, you were up in the Santa Barbara area. I was stationed at Vandenberg, which is 40 minutes or so up the road from you. So I totally understand that vibe. So yeah, we definitely cross paths. So, you know, you kind of mentioned it a little bit, but you went into college. What was your career path back then? And then you mentioned ministry. Did you go straight from college into ministry, or did you do some other career options?
No. Okay. So I started thinking, hey, man, I want to go into ministry. And then I joke and say it was my first year of Greek that helped me decide I didn't want to be in ministry. But it really wasn't. It wasn't the right timing. So I got my degree. I ended up getting a degree in psychology. And then after the first year, my wife and I were married, and then thought, hey, you know what? I think I want to go in education. So I moved back down to Southern California, went to school in San Bernardino, got my education degree there. And then I taught in San Bernardino, another hood place, but I loved it. I loved being there. I loved making an impact. I loved being able to, because I read to my students too. Because I would do the voices, and because they had lived in such a small area, right? If you know the San Bernardino area, like many inner city areas, the kids don't get out. They don't see past a mile radius or even that. And so I would read to them and expose them to all kinds of different books and do the voices, and it was fun. So I did education for 10 years before I reluctantly went back into ministry. I joke, if you know anything about the Bible, if you've ever heard the story of Jonah and the big fish, Jonah didn't want to do what God wanted him to do, so he said, "Yeah, I got to get your attention somehow." So finally, when I in 2000, I felt like, man, I'm gonna be like Jonah. I'm gonna get swallowed by a fish. I better go back into ministry. That's what God wants me to do, and I've been doing that ever since.
That's awesome. That's really cool. It's really interesting. You bring that up about teaching and being more of an inner city teacher. Um, one of the people that I met at Phoenix Fan Fusion, and I've wanted to try to get a hold of them, get back in touch with them. They were teaching in a prison in Tucson, and they were teaching kids that are supposed to be in high school, but many of them were on trial for heinous crimes and whatnot.
Sure.
Many of them being gang members, whatever it was. But she said, it's really funny when they try to come talk to me more in private because they are so in love with a certain fantasy series, or like Twilight. But of course, they can't tell that out loud. They don't want that reputation to be known, but they absolutely love the story. So they privately and quietly try to get their hands on like the next book of the series and how they can still be in that world. So that's really cool.
Yeah. Yeah, I love that. And the escape that we have in any kind of reading, right? That's the beautiful thing with it. Our imaginations can flow. And I wanted to help kids, and I still do. That's one of the reasons why I like writing kids' books. My goal is if kids can't read on their own, I want parents to read to their kids. Right. So I wanted to make books so I joke, not joke, but I say, hey, I write fantasy adventure books for kids that parents also enjoy. Because there's plenty of books when I was a young dad that I was reading to my kids. I'm like, man, this is just crap. I'm only reading it because I love my kids. But this is just horrible. It's like,
and of course, they probably want you to read the same story that's terrible like every night. It's like, why?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. So I dinner table, I sat and I read through the entire Lord of the Rings trilogy to them. And because I would do voices and we'd read a chapter at a time and I would expose them to different books and they loved that as well. So I always want to create those ventures and fantasy for kids that they can see themselves, even though I'm dealing with dragons and shapeshifters and other dimensions and just pure, like, way out there stuff. But kids go, hey, that's me. I can see a part of myself in that, or something that I've gone through. I can relate.
That's awesome. So you bring up this really great point that you're a minister, a pastor that is writing these fantasy books with dragons and shapeshifters and everything. And I remember we kind of had this conversation where when you're an author and you're trying to sell your books, people are often coming up to your table and like, oh, hey, tell me about the book. And okay, yeah, tell you, oh, wow, the book sounds cool. Well, now tell me more about you. And you have some people that are like, oh, you're a pastor. I don't necessarily want to read this. I'm worried about what's inside. But then you also have had the part where there's people, you're a pastor. How could you write about dragons? And you just get beat up on both sides. How have you had to deal with that?
Yeah, it's a lot of fun. I'll tell you. The expectation. So I'll just a little insight into my world as a pastor, right? As soon as I tell people a pastor, I get one or two reactions. It's like, okay, well, I'm done talking to you because must be a weirdo, or the other one, like, people apologize, right? Like, for what? So, this quick story. I was doing a funeral. I was doing a funeral for a lady, and the son gets up and he goes, "My mom was a hell of a woman." And he looks at me and goes, "I'm sorry, Pastor." And I'm like, "For what?" "I don't know your mom. She was a hell of a woman. I agree with you. I mean, okay, but like, why are you apologizing?" So yeah, it's interesting because now I do have a lot of people at church who have read the books, and the kids come up and they're excited. When's the next one coming out? And they like it. But sometimes people who know I'm a pastor, they expect, hey, so I'm going to be able to find chapter and verse and see Bible verses and all that in there. And my answer to them was, well, no, because I want this book to be for everybody. However, I have values that are my values, but also values that most people agree with, right? So be kind to others. Don't be a bully. And again, hope I don't offend anyone, but don't be an asshole. I don't put it in there, but it's like, really, this is just common courtesy. And so there's things within the book that I'm like, no, these are values. And then I have other people who say, well, fantasy, can't you just be real? I'm like, no, but we've been given an imagination for a reason. I go back to C.S. Lewis, who many people know as the author of Chronicles of Narnia, but what many people don't know is he was an amazing theologian. He was someone that in England, right during World War II, he was on the radio leading the nation as he was trying to help as they're dealing with this horrific war. And so C.S. Lewis, who's this amazing theologian, brilliant thinker, just genius, and yet he wrote books for kids in the fantasy genre and realm. There's something about that. And he and Tolkien were great friends, and they both influenced each other's works. And something you may or may not know, but the Ents, the way the Ents talk and the brum, Tolkien actually based that on how C.S. Lewis used to walk around and the noises he would make as he would run. So it's kind of that funny little piece. But
it sounds like
so
more like
I have
crisis of whenever you're trying to sit down or get up, like it goes down. You know?
Yeah, well, yeah, I do that all the time. I've become my dad, so that's it. I've just grown. Yeah, so that expectation, I think people, when they hear the word pastor, there's expectations on both sides. Like, okay, I can't relate to you. I don't believe it. You do. So I'm not going to read anything you've written. Which, for honestly, I read all kinds of books, whether I agree with the person or even know the person. But I'm like, it's just a fun book. And then I have people who expect me as a pastor that I'm just going to be quoting Bible verses. And I think God's given me this creativity. I can honor him in any way. I don't need to be so, narrow in that. But yeah,
right.
It's
Absolutely.
fun. I never know what I'm going to get sometimes. I'm like, oh, yeah, okay.
It always keeps it exciting when you're trying to sell books and get your work.
Oh, yeah.
So
yeah, definitely.
That's awesome. Yeah. So, that was one of the things where I really liked that part. And I liked how, as I read book one, and I guess we're getting a little bit ahead of my questions here. You kind of really started with, don't be a bully, stand up to bullies. That's kind of a little bit of our first introduction into book one, which is always, a great message, a great value, like you said. But one of the things that I really liked is when our main character is coming home from school after it's been quite an incredible day of events and things that the main character is going through. His dad comes into the room and just says, hey, it's okay to talk to me. It's okay to come up and talk to me if you're having a bad day, when you're going through life issues. So, when you set out to write books 1 through 7, did you set out to say, hey, here's some of the things that I really want to make sure I hit as far as that value approach?
Yeah. So, throughout the book, protect the weak is Alistair's motto. And then we learn more about him without giving a lot away, but it's really how he's been raised, that I am going to protect the weak. And as we find out shortly in book 1, Alistair is actually a dragon trapped in human form. So you think about it and go, well, dragon, protect the weak. Well, that's everybody. And so taking that responsibility, like it's almost a Spider-Man. With great power comes great responsibility. So yeah, when I started book 1, I thought, okay, I could write a how-to book about kids and teaching kids, and a friend of mine said, why don't you write fiction? And I thought, okay, well, what really impacts kids? Well, bullying has been around forever, and it still happens, right? And I thought, well, kids are dealing with that. And I wanted to have a character that they could look at that doesn't look at bullying and just walk away. He says, I'm going to put myself between a bully and those that are being bullied. And I wanted to see that. So it's not just Alistair, but his 2 best friends as well. That was something that as Alistair has been taught this, that that responsibility, that really, hey, we should look out for one another. And so I wanted that to resonate through at least book 1. And honestly, I wasn't sure if it was just going to be a one and done when I started writing. But as the characters became alive, as I started looking at Alistair's story more, and I would introduce certain things, I said, well, I have to explain that now. And then, now I have to explain that. Oh yeah, what happened to these people? I better explain that. And then it just started morphing into more books. But throughout, I said, hey, I want the protagonist to face these things, right? So the kids can relate. No, they can't relate to being a dragon. right? It's like, wow, that'd be awesome. But they could relate to, okay, I have a choice every day. I have a choice to either stay true to who I am, or choose to not be who I am.
Right.
And then so what I also wanted to show his and so often in the stories of this age, parents are absent, right? So again, I love the books, think they're fantastic, but let's just go Harry Potter, for example. Not only are the parents absent, but he's got a horrible home life. He doesn't have any adults that are nurturing and raising him that he can turn to. And even though once he gets to school, he's got adults that are against him as well, and he's only got one or two that he can go to. So he and his friends are alone in this island of, it's only by chance that they actually make the right choices over and over again. They go the wrong way to make the right choices, and I wanted to do it differently. I wanted to say, hey, here's a nucleus of not just Alistair's family, but Shelley's parents and Bernie's parents, and here's a nucleus that they can go to and go, hey, you're not in this alone. Uh, we've at least gone through something like that, and we're here
Right.
for you. And to show that that's possible without being preachy, right? So, but
Right.
just like, no, we can't, because I didn't have that as a kid either, right? I didn't have a dad I could go to at a certain point, but I did have other adults in my life, whether it was a teacher at school or
Mhm.
somebody that I could go to and have some support, and that changed everything for me. So I
Yeah.
wanted to show that that's possible.
Yeah, and I think that's probably why I resonated with that message so much because, you know, uh, I think it was really fate that brought us together because I wanted to find who's a new indie author, who's an indie author writing current books that I know I can give to nieces, nephews, something like that,
Hmm.
right? That has those good values. And I just felt like in culture society, there's so much of an influence and encouragement to not talk to your parents.
Hmm.
And that's where it's like,
Hmm.
no, like you need to talk to your parents. You need to have open communication because of what we're seeing in youth from anything from physical to spiritual to mental and emotional health standpoint.
Hmm.
Now,
Yeah.
the one thing I'm curious on, and I'm not trying to give a spoiler away, but in book one, you mentioned our main characters, his parents are not actually his parents
Yeah.
to a certain point. They're more his guardians. So was there a certain reason you put that in there? Was it more the story, or did you have like a personal connection to why you wanted to add that element?
Yeah, I'm also a huge fan of adoption. Part of it, my wife and I, we have two biological children, and then we adopted our daughter from China when she was 7. So adoption is a huge part of our lives and also a big part. So I wanted to show that, yes, Alistair, for all intents and purposes, he knows he's adopted. He knows these are his adopted parents, but the biology doesn't matter. This is mom and
Yeah.
dad. Like our daughter, she has no clue of her bio parents. I mean, she was abandoned as an infant, and so I wanted to show also that, hey, different relationships, different families, they're still your parents. And so Alistair doesn't look at that any differently. And I thought that was an important message I wanted to get across too. And it's important for me. We've walked through that. Our daughter's 24 now, so we've been able to look at that and then also say, oh, you know what, this is another family unit.
Yeah. So if you don't mind, can you kind of walk us through like from books 1 through 7 or whatever, like what were some of those values that you've planned out and you've wanted to really kind of emphasize in each book? So maybe our
Sure.
viewers can know like what to expect.
Yeah, so book one is awakening. Alistair awakens to who he really is. Book two is called Return, because he's got to return to where he came from. He finds out, he's not actually from Earth, but a different planet. Book three is called Reunite, because he's got to come back to Earth and reunite those other shapeshifters who've been left behind. And then
Oh, okay. Yep.
book four is called Rebellion, because all this has been happening because there was a rebellion, some evil characters on his home planet that were causing issues, and he has to deal with that in his role. And then book five of the series is called Winter, so it's the next story arc. So Alistair is older. He's firmly established in who he is, and he faces some private. He faces danger in each one, but the book 5 is probably his most dangerous challenge yet, because he's got to figure out. So book 1, the bullying, right? I wanted to talk about that, and then also standing up, because redemption is a big part through all the books, but there's also a part where you have a character, a villain who is relentless. At some point, you have to go, well, I only have a choice here, and the choice is to put this character down. There is not, I'm not allowed to help them make a choice. When Alistair has an option to give redemption and grace, he does, but he's also going, but I also stand for justice, and I've got to protect others. And if I don't stop you, you will continue to harm others, and I'm not going to allow that. So that's book 1. Book 2 furthers that along, and it's a continuation of that. And then as he connects also, as it deepens those connections with the adults in his life, with his friendships, and now a weight that is on him as he's returning back to where he came from and going, wait a minute, I don't want this responsibility. This is a lot. This is a physical challenging. This is, can I just, is there somebody else that can step forward? And really in our lives, sometimes, no, we have to stand in that gap. That's it. And it's true. The gap can be minor. Well, you're former military. That idea of going, hey, here's the reality is like, who's going to do it? I'm here. I'm going to do it. So I wanted to show that. Book 3, there's some I deal with some racism stuff, because again, I'm writing during 2020. We got all kinds of race stuff, but put it in a way that kids can understand. And so when you use pixies and fey creatures, and they're being persecuted because of their who they are, it's easier to see that, wait, that's just wrong. That's just not. We can't do that. And so I wanted to do it in a way, again, that was kid friendly, but to go, no, that's we can stand up against that. And so there's some things that I go back to Alistair, and I'll think of the quote in a second, but going back to when he was a child, that there was a mirror right by the door of his house, and the quote, and I'm going to butcher it, but the only thing the only thing that allows evil to flourish is for a good man to do nothing.
Oh yeah.
And so
Originally,
every day when
Edmund
he would
Burke
leave,
given that quote.
Yes, and Edmund Burke. So I quote that in there, and that's part of it. But Alistair, when he would leave the house every day, there was a mirror by the door, and that quote was above that. And so he would see himself and see that quote daily. Again, his parents just trying to help him understand that, no. It's not somebody else's job. It's each of our jobs.
Oh,
we
yes.
can't allow that to go on. So that was important for me to, again, I worked inner city for years, and just seeing the results of some of that stuff. And then book 4 continues that, again, standing up against that, and then personal responsibility. And then book 5, it's redemption again, that he's got to figure out, what do I do with this person who has been treated me so horribly, and I can go for vengeance. But this person actually is seeking redemption. What am I going to do? Yeah. And so those are the 5 of the Alistair story. And then there's 2 other books that are offshoots. They're in the same universe. Alistair's in them, but he's not the main character. It's called what can I think of it? Oh, Fierce Protector. It's a character that I fell in love with. She showed up in book 2. My role, what I thought was she'd be in for a paragraph or 2, and then she'd leave. And then she said, no, Well, her name is Swahili, and it means fierce, and she's a centaur. So she's, again, there's racism in that, because her parents were in Kentucky on a farm when they had to be trapped on Earth. But she's fierce, and so she got her own series. She's in every other book, and she got her own series. But that was partly also she's 10, and so I wanted to stay in that range in a school kind of thing. And then again, that Fierce Protector. She's one of my favorite characters, because she's just kick butt. Yeah, you can see Macaulay right there. in the middle. And then Scales of Justice, Cindy is a mermaid shifter. She shows up in book 3. And I had asked my sister, hey, if you want to be my book? And she said, yeah, can you make me a mermaid? So my sister's name is Cindy, and I made her a mermaid, and I made her a kick butt
Nice.
mermaid. And actually, there's some dealing with some human trafficking in the Scales of Justice deal.
Nice.
Again, it's because it's fantasy. You can get away with this as she rescues all the captives and the slavers that are on this ship. She has her best friend who happens to be a Kraken shapeshifter. They just take the ship to the bottom of the ocean and go, yeah, there's no redemption for you slavers. Yeah. So there's definitely some fun parts of that too.
That's got to be pretty hard because I mean, so what's great is you and I both book 1, we referenced Edmund Burke. And at the beginning of my first book, I just said, you know, there was a current professor in California who's challenging that there's no evidence to support that Edmund Burke ever used that quote. So I was like, you know, author could be unknown, right? But the quote is still there. Like you can't erase the quote from history.
No.
So I put it there because of the same thing of it is upon us to take action when we see evil. It's upon us to take action to stop injustice and all that stuff. So we're very similar in that. And then my current series, so granted, all of my fans know both of my 2 series are for mature audiences. My second series, the second book, he goes and kills off a human trafficking organization in the most brutal way possible. So is it hard for you to tailor down or to know where to balance some of the intensity when you're writing for a kid audience?
Yeah, it's interesting because again, well, and that one probably be more in the young adult area, but I know I've got fans who are young and that pick up the books, right? So I've got fans who are 11 years old that have read every single book multiple times. So I would tell parents often, when I was a kids pastor, they would say, hey, we need to talk to our kids about this. And I said, hey, you want to be honest without being graphic, right? You can be honest with your kids without having to go in every little detail. So I reference human trafficking. We talk about slavers and we talk about people, but I'm not saying what's going to happen to them, right? It's those who are older who understand the context will know, okay, this may be where we're going and why it's imperative that she's rescuing these mostly girls and women. But the kids can at least understand these are bad guys. They've stolen these people. They're going to sell people. We sell people like slaves. That's wrong. So kids can understand that without having to go down a path of okay, what happens in this, and not go into like the sex trade or anything like that. I don't need to go there. Can be honest without being graphic. Yeah, it is a thing because even with a death scene, right? There's battles. I had one person. So the very first book, she read book 1 and she was disturbed because Alistair as a dragon rips apart a deer. And I said, well, okay, he is a dragon. He's not a vegetarian dragon. And I didn't want to make it like a bloody gore, but you got to have something in there. It's like putting a fart joke in there. I wanted the 5th grade boys to laugh at it. So there's fart jokes. And people go, we got fart jokes. Well, yeah, because farting is funny. I'm going to put it in a kid's book, and if we're honest, adults, we think farting is funny. So it works all the way around. So yeah, it's a fun dance. And I really, part of me is I go, would this have been okay for me to read to my kids at that age?
Yeah.
And I tell parents, like, cause I've had kids as young as 6 read them. And I always tell parents, man, you should be reading what your kids are reading anyway, regardless, right? It's a good practice to get in. Because if the author has a different view, like we let our kids watch the Lord of the Rings movies early on, right? When they first came out. And we're like, okay. And other parents wouldn't. And I'm like, okay, that's fine.
Right.
We're going to have different values. But I tell parents, read books before you read them to your kids. Like, do I read all the Harry Potter books? Is because I'd have parents going, what do you think about Harry Potter? I think it's blah, 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 blah. And I'd say, have you read them? No, I just heard someone else talking. I said, well, you might want to read them. I have opinions, but I've actually read every single one. So I have an informed opinion. So even with these books, I think they're appropriate for kids. And I tell parents, I think it's fine for you to read to kids. But there's some parents that they'll be like, it's a dragon. I can't read that. I'm like, okay, well, then again, it's not for you. Just tell you right ahead. It's got a dragon on it. It's the Dragonborn series. Alistair's the dragon. If you don't like dragons, don't read my books.
Yeah. But also just remember your kids are probably playing Call of Duty and proud about headshots that they just made. So
yeah. And I agree with you. And that's part of it too, is going, listen, here's the thing. I tell parents this, that I'm going to reinforce values that I believe that you as parents would want your kids to have. Hey, doing the right thing, standing up for others, being honest, doing the hard thing, having fun, being a good friend. I mean, these are all throughout the books. Friendship is extremely important.
Which I really liked in book 1 too. You were able to capture the friendship of the three characters, three main characters that we follow in book 1, to where there's times where there's kind of some tension. They're poking at each other with jokes, and it's like, oh man, that's just chafing me the wrong way, you jerk. And I really loved that because I felt like it was so genuine and authentic.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate that. I wanted to show that. And I wanted to show Alistair, you get a strong female character, strong male character, apart from Alistair, his two best friends. And I wanted to show you can have friendships. At that age, these are three friends. And friends sometimes get upset with each other. Sometimes friends don't agree, and it's okay. I mean, I'm very much of the philosophy. I can be friends with someone and not agree with every single thing they believe, or vice versa.
Right.
And that drives me nuts that we think, oh, I can't be friends with someone unless they agree with everything. Well, then clone yourself. Be your own best friend. I don't know what to tell you.
Be your own best friend.
You're never gonna. You're only gonna have your own self. I mean, forget it. It drives me crazy.
Yeah, I was about to say, I really spend a lot of time with myself, so I guess I am my own best friend.
Well, I argue with myself. I don't know about you, but I'm like, you're an idiot, man. I don't know what you're talking about.
Yeah, that's awesome. Well, and that's where when we come from a values approach to the writing, and if you're getting beaten up because you're a pastor, it's like, well, when I was in Qatar, I worked a lot with Malik Usman, who was a Muslim. And man, there were 1 or 2 times where he had me laughing so hard I fell out of my chair. And even though we had 2 very different religious views, we still were able to connect on values, but also the human element of our errors.
Yes.
And that's where I love the fact that there are great things that you can learn from the Muslim religion. There are some parts that teach good principles, but also their culture. And what was funny was how, I'm now 37, single guy. He was like, dude, you would be really shoved off to the side in Arab culture. And I was like, why? And he's like, because you're not married. If you're not married, at 18 on your way to family, what's wrong with you? And so it's really interesting of how just because you are one religious view as an author doesn't mean you still can't have great values overall for people to learn from.
That's right. Well, and I'll just talk about Jesus for a second, right? So as a follower of Jesus, the reality is Jesus said, hey, let me sum everything up for you. Okay, you want to know what the greatest commandment is? Let me tell you. Love God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength, and love your neighbor as you love yourself. Boom, drop the mic. I'm done. There we go. So, I mean, for me, it's like, okay, so I'm going to get upset with
you don't need anything else, guys. I'll see you later.
That's it. Those 2. That's 2. That's it. I'm going to make it real easy. Just 2. But so I think of that, right? So the barista screws up my drink at Starbucks.
Yeah.
Well, I could get all pissed about it, yell and scream, act an idiot, or go, oh, wait a minute. Hold on a second. I should love her the way I would love to be. I should treat her the way I want to be treated. Oh, you know what? Hey, it's cool. I'll be standing over here waiting for you to make my drink. She already feels bad. Why am I going to be a jerk? And right. But one of my philosophies is, hey, don't be a jerk for Jesus. Because there's people who, I'm like, guess what? There's no such thing really as a jerk for Jesus, because you're not for Jesus if you're a jerk. I'm just going to say that. But
Yeah.
those are things that resonate in my. I'm like, hey, my job is to love people, whether I agree with them or not. I got all kinds of friends,
Yep.
and it's like, hey, what can I learn from you? Because I don't know. I
Hmm.
I want to have that conversation. I was just having a conversation at the store today with an African American woman, and I said, well, I know one thing. I've never been an African American woman, so you have a perspective that I don't, and I would love to learn more from your perspective because
Yeah.
I, I will never understand that. And it was just I try to do that. So that's in my writing too. Whether it's trying to understand each other, trying to find out, ask questions.
Hmm.
I think asking questions is so key, and that ability to want to learn. And
Yeah.
so anyway, that permeates through my writing as well.
Yeah, no, I really enjoyed book one, and I mean, even for me, in my 30s, I wanted to make sure I read through it and kind of saw your message. And there's one part where you make reference to Star Wars characters, and I literally laughed out loud because it was just so well written, and it just hit at the right moment. And I was like, nice. And of course, like, there's references to Lord of the Rings where it's like, we are now in Middle Earth. And it's like, this is not Middle Earth. No, we're in Middle Earth. Fine. Let him have his thing. you know?
Yeah,
So,
yeah.
so
I
that's,
mean, listen, I'm a big geek, so my characters had to be geeks too, right? That's just the
yeah,
reality.
yeah, that's
In
awesome.
book
Okay.
three, they're really excited because they're going to LA Comic Con. That's I'm not foreshadowing. They're so excited about that. So they're going. They got great costumes, and Alistair's like, man, I can't wait. I can manifest my wings, and boom, I'm gonna have the best costume of anybody there. So yeah.
That's awesome. So now, one of the things that I really like too is on your website, and that was what we were just showing on the screen. Whoopsies. Where is it? Never mind. I might have already put it down. There it is. So on your website, you have authors alike. And this
Hmm.
was something that I really loved was where you have a collection of about 11 different indie authors that you highlight. And I thought that was really unique because not a lot of people do that. So kind of what was your whole motivation behind that and why did you want to highlight these people?
Yeah, thanks. There's a couple reasons for that. I'm also part of a group, the 20 Books group. I talked a little bit about it. It's just a collection of authors, and the philosophy of that is, hey, the rising tide lifts all boats. That we can help each other because if you're successful, I'm successful, right? That
Yeah.
this idea that we're not in competition. I mean, listen, there could be 100 different authors in my genre writing what I write, and still I've got a unique voice that people are going to like. And if you've got a book that I'm like, man, I think you'd like what TJ has to offer, well, they're going to love what you write and maybe not what I write. And so
Right.
I even like at the fan fusion is like, I know that Danny, who was across from me, she's an LGBT author and she writes a certain thing. And I'm like, someone's over there, do you have these characters? I'm like, no, but my friend Danny does. She's right over
Yeah.
there. You might like going over to her. I sent a couple people to your way because they're talking about what's your thing like? And I thought, my buddy TJ's over there. He writes some militaries. You'd like what he's writing. So I got involved in a Facebook group, not Facebook, Instagram group, and so these were just authors. Some of those are they live in the UK,
I
all
was
around the
about to
world, and
say
we
I
just
think like
thought,
none of them live in the US. like
no, I
everyone
think I'm
was
the only
UK
one.
and Canada.
Yeah, yeah. So I read a lot of the books, and then we just said, hey, would we be willing to kind of band together and put on
Nice.
our own websites on there? And I'm like, sure. Um, and again, I just figure if someone else doesn't, they don't want what I write, but they can want what someone else writes.
Yep.
Fantastic. Um, I had my publisher asked me early on. He said, "What's success for you?"
Mm,
And I said, "Well, yeah, I'd like to make money. Okay, so I'd love this to make money, but really, the success is someone reads the book. That I have a kid say to their parent, I got to get the next book because I love it. Or someone
right.
comes to me and says, do you have another one? Because I'm done. I've read your books 3 times, and I gotta get the next one. So for that, I can have open hand, right? So I can put other authors on because I'm like, I want them to have success too. And
Right.
so that's really my thinking. And I don't know what I'm doing. I'm figuring this out as I go along too, right? So I've written 7 books, but each one's a new experience. Like I've never written 7 books before, but I'm
Yeah,
learning
like
from others. Right. Book 8 will be I've never written 8 books before. I don't know what you know. Um, so really, if I can highlight other authors that aren't, even if there's genres that are different than mine, but we're not in opposition, I'm gonna put authors up there and go, give it a
right,
try.
right, absolutely. So what are some of the biggest things that you've learned about yourself, but also the craft of writing as you've gone on this journey
Mm.
now for 4 years or so?
One that my college professor was wrong, that I could write, and I've learned that if I write what I like to read, there's other people that like to read that as well. So I love reading kids' books too. Some of them are like I said. There's like stick a needle in my eye. It's terrible. But others, I'm like, if I have to, I will. But I mean, part of it is I enjoy reading. I like YA. I like reading different things because I want to see what's coming out there. And so if I like writing what I like to read, other people will do it too. The other thing I think I learned, and I've been struggling with it a little bit, is there's plenty of time to write. It's just choosing to make
Mm,
that time, right?
yeah,
It's I love playing video games. I love watching TV. Those are fun, but if I spend an hour watching TV and I didn't get any writing done, if I spend an hour writing, even if I delete most of it, I still gotten some writing done.
yeah.
So that's some things I've learned myself. And the other thing is I've learned I can read the same sentence 5 times and I don't see the mistakes that my brain just passes over, and I give it to someone else and they're like, hey, did you know you spelled that wrong? I'm like, no, I didn't know I spelled my main character's name wrong.
Yeah.
Thanks for pointing it out for me. So yeah.
It continues to blow my mind with how much, like, so I'm now working. I just finished some of the updates for book 3 of my fantasy series.
Hmm.
I took a pause in book 4 to write my side series. So I'm about what, 5.5, 6 books deep now in my writing
Yeah.
career. And so when I went back through book 3 to do these edits, I had the 2.5 other books already done. So you see so many different errors and so many different things that you get to fix. And yet I know it's just going to be bleeding red once it gets done with Catherine. And, when I found Catherine as my editor, she even said, TJ, I am not perfect. I am a human. I will not catch every single error as well. And
Hmm.
you just need to know that
Hmm.
up front. So it's like, you're perfect. You're exactly what I want. But even then, it's like, oh yeah, Peru. That's spelled Peru, not Puru. Okay, got it. Yep. So, oh
Yeah.
my gosh.
Well, I have probably noticed more errors as I'm reading more, whether it's traditionally published books or independently published books, and just realize that's just part of it. I think I heard one time, whether it's true or not, about 10% of errors in any book, even your published house. It just slips through the cracks.
Mhm.
So read your Stephen King, you're going to find errors in it, even though it's been looked at, 100 times, and you just go, oh yeah, my brain's going to put it in the right way. So yeah, I kind of got over that thinking, oh man, there's gonna be problems. Like, yeah, as long as it doesn't
Mhm.
take the reader out of the story,
Right.
that's where I have a hard time. If I'm reading something and it's such a glaring thing, I just read Peru. It's Peru, even though you spelled it wrong. I mean, that's Peru. I got it. But if it takes me out of the story or I'm confused, I'm like, I'm okay. I'm lost. So yeah.
Yeah. As John just said, I'm in my final polish pass, and I've hit that I hate reading my book moment. But every error feels like I'm getting smacked with a waterlogged rope. We've
Oh,
been there.
that's a great description. I know it's like, oh crap! Look at that, red, red, red. I
Yeah.
also didn't know. Listen, when I got out of college, I thought I'm done. I don't need to keep writing and rewriting for the rest of my life. I'm like, and I'm finding this fun. What am I doing to myself?
Yeah.
But it's a good time.
And of course, right now it's football season for me. So on Saturdays, it's nothing but nonstop college football. And then on
Yeah.
Sundays, being a Lions fan, I'm used to losing. So it's like, I don't really need to watch the game. but I normally have the game playing now on a screen somewhere while I'm like, okay, I can tune in when the announcer is getting excited, and now I can come back to writing the manuscript or doing whatever.
Well, this season may screw you up because so far they're doing pretty good. I mean, come on, Lions.
If we had some decent refs today, we would have won that game against Seattle. That was some BS calls or no calls. Anyways, I digress.
Yeah.
So, I really love how you said, I was told I'm not a writer early on. Mm-hmm. And I think for me, I really got beat up because I was homeschooled and I really struggled with reading, comprehending, and applying the different skill sets. So when I started writing, I didn't know what first person or third person was. I didn't know what past or present tense were. And I am learning now as an adult as I go, all of these things where some people may say like, hey, dude, how did you not know that? Like, that's lesson 101. It's like, yeah, well, I deleted lesson 101 and I just skipped on into adulthood.
Yep.
So
the reality is too. Oh, go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say, what would your biggest advice be to those who are aspiring authors and starting out?
I think reading. And you kind of identify, and if you're, because I had that same thing, right? I do a lot of first person, and then I will make that transition. If it's a new person, I actually put that, like, whose perspective it is now in the book. Almost the entire first book is just Alistair's perspective, and as the characters grow, I'm adding different perspectives in, right? So you get Shelley's perspective on things, and Bernie's, and Alistair, and Aileen. But I think just as you read books, and I also encourage, I was telling you as we were pre-talking, I'll read books by female authors because I want to get that perspective, right? So I'm reading books from different authors that to challenge myself, but also to get a different perspective. Like, oh, okay, so I really like the way they did that, right? The omniscient view where I'm like, okay, that's not me. That's not how I want to write that. I sure prefer to do it like in my styles, more like first person narrative in that. But as you're reading and you're seeing that difference, and I think that helps. At least it helped me. And the other thing is, if you've got beta readers or people that can give you feedback, I've got a guy that asked me to give him feedback. He's written like 5 pages, and I need to give him feedback, but it's really hard because I'm like, man, you didn't give me enough. I mean, I can tell you, I want to get into it, but I don't have enough. So, but having people feedback for you. My wife is not a fantasy reader, but she's an alpha reader for me because she reads. She'll do like a couple chapters at a time, and if it makes sense to her, then I'm like, okay, I'm on the right spot. So, get some people you trust who will be honest and tell you, I love it, but I just don't get it.
I think that's one of those things too, where you have to write the story you want to read. And sometimes when you're starting out, you are so unsure of yourself, right? You have that imposter syndrome of like, oh, am I really, whatever, that all you want is to try to find people that will give you feedback. And unfortunately, many of those people may not be the story or the style of story that they really would normally read.
That's right.
So it can be very hard starting out. And I know we just brought on Keonis to start writing within the world of Pentagoth. And I will give him a hard time for probably the rest of his life, where he messaged me and he's like, I just got my first 700 words in and I'm exhausted. I was like, yep. Now you just got 97,000 more words to go, big guy.
Yeah, that's good, man. That's chapter headings. I think that's the other thing I would say, that for new authors, if you can become a beta reader for someone, right? So
that's a great idea.
That's actually, for an author I liked, I read her stuff and I just had written her and said, I love your stuff. If you ever need another beta reader, I'd be happy to do it. I've now, I think I've beta read for like 10 of her books. And actually that's how I got my editor, because he was her editor and doing that. So I beta read for, I don't know, 4 different authors. And again, some of it is not my genre. So to be honest with you,
Right.
one of them completely outside my comfort zone. Like, wow, this is really interesting. But I'll read it. I'll give you my feedback. It's not what I would pick up for myself, but I can still help you and see things or go and listen. This makes sense here. I'm pretty good at continuity things and going, hey, back in chapter 2, you said this about this character. And now here we are in chapter 12 and you said this. So you might, that's the kind of feedback I'm getting, not Amos to comma or that. It's more like bigger picture. But that's helped me, I think, be a better author by reading other people and helping them.
Absolutely. Yeah, no, that's awesome. So any new projects that you're currently working on that we can expect? Which I'm sure you get plastered all the time by your fans.
I do. The good thing is a lot of them come to my church. The bad thing is a lot of them come to my church. So they're like, when are you doing the next book? I'm like, oh, man, you know, and I'm the same way. I'm a fan of books. And I'm like, hey, when's your next book? But I've stopped that. Now that I know the effort it takes to get the next one out. Yeah, so I did a poll. I did a in-person convention recently, and I was selling books, and I had people coming back to because they picked up book 1 last year, and they're like, oh, good, you're here. I want to get the rest of the books for my kids. And so I was asking them, okay, so I've got three choices. Book 2 of the 2 different series that offshoot series, the Fierce Protector or Scales of Justice series, or book 6 in the Alistair series, and overwhelming it was book 6 of the Alistair. So that's where I'm going to be focusing my time. The working title right now is Wasteland, and so I had a rough start, like in outline in my brain, and the way I kind of do it is I put the pieces of puzzle together before I start writing, and then I'm kind of a pantser. Right? Not so much a planner, though I have an idea, but I'll just start writing. And I've got a short story that takes place after book 5 that I'm working on too. So I'm going to get that wrapped up in the next few weeks, send that out to my newsletter. I'm terrible at doing my newsletter. So I gotta bribe people like, here's a short story for you, because I suck. So I'm working on those 2 things.
Yeah. And I mean, I'm terrible with newsletter. I try to do the social media engagement. Like I haven't done a live on Instagram for 2 weeks now, or TikTok, because 1, I went to Dragon Con, which was a great time. But then I got COVID on my way back. So I quarantined for that. And I've just been slammed with doing the edits. And so I'm like, you know what? I'm just taking a break. But I love doing the author AMAs. I love getting to talk to other authors, because it's one of those things where when I was talking to Seth on Thursday night, I just said, Seth, do you find it hard to read other authors now? And he kind of laughed. And it was one of those things where we've developed our voice as a writer to where when we're reading someone else's work, it was like, oh, no, I wouldn't do that. I would change this up. And so it's hard for us to really get engaged in some stories. So,
yeah. Honestly, I love dragon books, but I haven't read a dragon book since I started writing, because I don't want to unconsciously steal stuff. But the reality is, we're all stealing from someone. We think, man, I got an original thought. Like, yeah, well, guess what? Someone in the 6th century had that same thought before.
Exactly.
So,
yeah.
But
it's still fun because you had that idea.
So that's the only genre I kind of stay away from is the with dragons, because I just want to. And the other thing people ask me, like, my dragons, I got villains or bad dragons, but these are also good dragons, because dragons are typically depicted as evil, horrible, terrible, and like, no, how about extremely powerful and amazing and fantastic creatures, but also doing good. So
yeah. Well, that was kind of one of the things I wanted to do with my story. I was like, you know what would traditionally be good, I'm going to make it bad, and what was traditionally bad, I'm going to make it good somehow, some way. And so and the other thing too is because I took everything fantasy. Like I literally have steampunk with angels, demons, orcs, centaurs, minotaurs, everything. And I've even already, because I developed different age brackets of, the age of survival, the age of discovery, the age of expansion. all the way to the age of science. So I'm like, dude, I could take this into the age of science where they got like floating ships and all this other crap flying around. So like,
Yep.
I could spend the rest of my life there. But yeah, that's where I was like, hey, if centaurs are traditionally good, guess what? I'm going to make them evil somehow. I don't know how, but here we are. And so now in book 3, we're introduced to the Centaur when that conversion went over into the evil side. So you get to have fun, right? You get to just enjoy creating. I was having this discussion with a bookshop owner, and she was commenting on historical fiction, where she was like, well, this, I didn't like how the author did this. And I said, well, in historical fiction, you're really getting to add the context within the fiction. Like you can't change the events, but you get to have fun with the context. Whereas if you're liking fantasy or sci-fi, everything is what if. Well, this doesn't work. Well, what if it did on this planet?
Right.
Okay, fine. I can't argue that. So
I like that too. The world building is fun, and the way I think of it is like you can do anything within your own world that you've created as long as you don't defy your own logic, right?
Yeah.
So if in my world I've created where the reason why we have myths on Earth with these mythological creatures is because they've actually visited from Theria over the millennia, and so all of that. We have Gorgons that came to visit from Theria to Earth, and that's why we have mythology about Gorgon. So it also gives me a chance to bring mythological creatures from every culture, which is fun for me because then it's a more holistic approach too, right? It's not just your typical Celtic mythology, although there's a lot of that because that's what most people know. But I can bring in mythology, the Nagas from India and some of these other creatures, or some from the Maori tribes in New Zealand. They've got mythology, so I can have these creatures. And as long as I don't defy my own logic, I'm okay with it. Even though if I created like up is down and down is up, as long as I stick with that, I'm okay.
Yeah. That's awesome.
Yeah.
Well,
one other thing I was thinking, TJ, if you don't mind, one last thing about young authors is, and I'm going to go back to my friend who gave me just a little bit of his book to read. Is just say, just write, right? Don't try to self-edit. Don't try to do it right then. Just write. Get the story down. Just get it out. And then the first pass, you go back through and restart your edits, because then if I work for a month to get that one sentence just right, I'm missing some of that creative time. So that's what I found too. And I do self-edit as I go. I try not to, but I just want to get the story down. And I can go back through and go, oops, yep, I slipped into third person or first person. And that's why other eyes can see that. So that was the only other piece I would say for young authors or just starting out. Just get the story down. We can fix the inconsistencies or the grammar or the stuff later, but you've got a story to tell that nobody else does. We can put it in a format later that makes sense, but get your unique story on page, on the computer, whatever you're using, without agonizing over the I got to get it right. So, yeah.
No, that's absolutely. When I first started book 1, I was starting in a hotel because we were activated for COVID. So I was working in the hospitals for like 4 days a week. And then I would go back to the hotel room and I would start writing. But I wasn't really taking the whole author thing seriously. It was just more of like that to do. And so I would write a chapter and then I would self-edit and move on. And I continue that practice all the way into book 2, where write the chapter, save it, go back through, do the whole pass. By the time I got to book 3, I'm like, I don't got time for that. We are just writing. Boom. And granted, like you said, so my fantasy series is omniscient narrator with third person. Well, in book 3, I hit those 2 and I added first person without even realizing it. So when I'm going through edits, I'm like, wow, I am really that terrible. But hey, the manuscript is done. Like we said, it's done. It's now moving on to editing.
That's right. And the fact is, I mean, everyone who's written a book and hit publish or whatever it is, you've done something unique that the majority of the world, if we think the other 7 billion people on the planet, most of those have never done that. And so to really have that published and have your name on it and go, even if you don't sell another copy, you've just done something that no one else
Yeah.
has. And I just think that's just a fun perspective and going, okay, all right, that was pretty cool.
Absolutely. I mean, 80% of the US say they wish they would like to write a book. Less than 12% ever actually publish their book, whether it's indie or traditional. And then even from there, I think it's less than like 3% ever go on to a second book. So, I mean, you know, we really are in a select group of people. And I think is exactly like you said, if you go into it with no expectations, with the simple fact of I want to do this and I just want to physically hold my book in my hand, then go for it. Because that was where Brian Day, one of our printers here in Goodyear, he had this printed up, Bloodbath, for me. He's got one at the shop to show as a customer example and one for me. And I was like, it's just so different when you get to physically hold your book and be like, yep, I spent 2 months doing that.
Yes.
So
yes. Yeah, it's a great feeling. And I love helping other people do it. I love what you're doing and interviewing other authors and just getting voices out there. It's important.
Absolutely. Well, you know, like I said, man, I wanted to find someone who wrote kids' books, because that was one of my biggest things growing up was Chronicles of Narnia, Sugar Creek Gang, Choose Your Own Adventure, and then the Left Behind teen series. I think that's when I stopped reading because one, they could not print the books fast enough for me to read. And two, that's when I really got into computers, video games, and everything else. So for me, as soon as I found it, I was like, I want to be able to find other authors to where I've read your work. I think it's great. I think kids would love it. I think parents reading with kids would love it. So, you know, sweet. Let's have you on. Let's highlight your work.
Thanks, brother. Appreciate it.
Absolutely. So, guys, I think we're going to wrap it up here. All of Brett's links that I could find, as you guys see, he has BrettHumphreyAuthor.com on his subtitle, but in the description of this video, you have his website link, you have his Amazon author page, I believe his Facebook page. So definitely all the ways you can get a hold of him. 7 books with the 8th one, 6th in the series on the way soon. So Brett, any final thoughts you want to share with the audience?
Yeah, I mean, for those who are writing, keep writing, and just know someone's going to like your book, and find authors and share them out there. So that's the best thing we can do for each other too, right? As indie authors go, man, you're probably going to like this. You want to check them out. So thanks for having me on, and a lot of fun.
Awesome. All right, everyone. Well, thanks again for tuning in. And Saturday, we'll see you for the next update. And I will be announcing hopefully the next author for our AMA. Other than that, thanks, everyone. We'll talk to you later.